What's up, babes? Biakai, Mrs. Neath Ultimate Smite here. I went on Twitter and asked for some of the hottest, spiciest Smite takes you guys had, and I thought it'd be fun to try and discuss some of them, just not in any particular order. This video is probably going to be all over the place. If you want to skip the introduction and get just straight to the hot takes, skip to this skip to this timestamp on screen. There, I did it. To be honest, I'm not really the most educated person in the Smite community. Heck, I got 2,000 worshippers on Ratatoskr before realizing you could buy his acorn outside of base. That's a real thing that happened. Due to this, I may bring up a topic that I'm not particularly knowledgeable on, but when this happens, instead of trying to force an opinion or exclude it entirely, I'm instead going to kind of walk through my train of thought and leave it open-ended. But really quickly, I kind of want to go over what a hot take actually is, because I know that this video will contain a large variety of takes. I just want to make sure we're on a similar page moving forward. So for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to define a hot take as an unpopular and interesting game or character changing opinion. And I specify interesting because, let Apollo Ultimate execute. It might be considered a hot take. I just don't think it's interesting to talk about. And also opinions on polarizing topics. I'm putting this here because if you take literally any polarizing subject and give an opinion about it, the other side is going to say that that is an unpopular opinion, and some might say that it's a hot take. So I thought it'd be fun to showcase multiple sides of a controversial topic and talk about them as a whole. Also, I know it goes without saying, but let's be civil in the comment section because this video is going to be controversial by design. Not only because it's going to specifically highlight hot takes, but because I will also be giving my opinion on said topics. And I don't think a single person watching this will agree with everything shown or said in this video. But that's kind of the point, right? We kind of need to accept that not everyone will agree. And I also hope we accept that a disagreement isn't a bad thing by nature. Sorry, I just wanted to get all that shit out of the way. But yeah, let's move on to the first hot take. This first one comes from Hashi, who states, Smite's identity is that it's in the hole. Smite cannot ever be popular or it would implode, and its charm comes from being the bronze medal of MOBAs solely due to console players. I then asked them to elaborate and was told that if Smite was ever going to be the most popular MOBA, Smite would implode. High-res, past, present, or future cannot handle it. I am about 50-50 on this. I'd argue that Smite's identity, while that's definitely a part of it, it's more defined by, the mythology, things like the unique MOBA camera angle, its history on console, but credit where credit's due. That's always been kind of in the back of my mind, right? How many of you guys had to describe Smite to somebody, but then compare it to something else and kind of imply that it's a less popular version of that, right? So I totally see where they're coming from. Smite not being able to handle a significant influx of players, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I'm more on the side of it probably is true. And part of that indecisiveness comes from, I don't know whether he's referring to just high-res fumbling an influx of players in general, or if he's literally referring to the servers that just won't be able to handle such a large group of players suddenly playing. I don't really know which one he's referring to, but either way, yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards he's probably correct, but I'm not entirely sure. This one comes from Wafi, who says, healers are fun and metas are fun when healers are meta because fights don't end immediately, allowing for more outplay and counterplay potential. This is one of those opinions that will vastly differ from person to person based on what you believe is fun and the type of player you are. With this, I strongly disagree on both a personal and community level. From what I remember, historically, one of the most disliked Smite metas are healer metas. But on the other side, if you do enjoy playing healers, then yeah, healer metas are going to be fun for you. And I can't really say that that's wrong, right? So if you want to argue that from a personal standpoint, I don't think anybody could disagree with that. But if you want to try to apply it to the broader Smite ecosystem, I do have some counter arguments. But when healer metas are introduced, I don't want to say in general people dislike it, but I do think there's a significant group of people that do dislike healer metas that I think would be disingenuous to ignore. For the fights don't end immediately, that's assuming that they all do when it's not a healer meta, which I also disagree with, and that also assumes that longer fights will equate to better quality fights, which I also don't agree with, specifically in the context of a healer meta, because sometimes, actually I'd argue most of the time, healer metas devolve into a poke game until one side is kind of forced to give something up, commit to a rough fight, or just make some kind of hero play. So the counterplay to that would then be knowing what items to build, and also that changes the fights you can and cannot take. And so to some, that might be a lot of fun to them. They might enjoy that, but for others, it wouldn't. And I'm on that side. I don't enjoy healer metas. I do enjoy playing some healers. And also sometimes you can just straight up lose before the game starts if your team doesn't draft a healer, or like it's ranked and all the good healers get banned except for one that the enemy team has, and then you're just strictly at a disadvantage, which just sucks all around. But I will say his point about outplay potential, I do think is the strongest point. I'm sure many people can relate to this, but there have been like many times where I'm playing a healer or a teammate's playing a healer, and we win like an extremely close, drawn out fight because of the healer specifically. And so making some like big outplay at 50 HP is like really hype, and I get it from that angle, but that doesn't happen every game. That doesn't even happen super often. Oh, we got a spicy one from Rose Pop, who says, I think they need to be scummier with their monetization because they need money. So yeah, people are going to have a problem with this statement, but I also think it's extremely interesting. So this person is basically commenting on the balance that Hi-Rez needs to find between monetization and consumer satisfaction. Because yeah, this comment seems a little harsh, but they are correct in the sense that Hi-Rez does need money, and I don't think it's a stretch to assume that they could be struggling financially. And I'm hoping I don't need to elaborate on why Hi-Rez needs money. The issue here stems from consumer satisfaction being different from person to person. And I just realized after saying this multiple times out loud, that's probably going to be a common theme with this video. But some people have hundreds of hours in Smite without purchasing a single skin and don't give a fuck how aggressive Hi-Rez is with their skin marketing. But someone more conscious about it would be, and could view aggressive skin sales as disrespectful to the player base. And again, I can't really fault them for that, right? Because Hi-Rez has mismanaged Smite and their other various products. So it just seems like a giant lose-lose, right? So it's a lose for the players because a lot of people just already feel disrespected and might view some kind of skin or diamond marketing campaign or sale or promotion or whatever as even more disrespectful. And it's a lose for a Hi-Rez because I don't think there's a single thing that they can do that would make the majority of players happy while also giving them enough money to sustain the game for the time being. To be fully transparent, I don't really have a strong opinion on skin monetization because I just think I think about it fundamentally different than a lot of other people. I'm not the kind of person that is intrigued by the majority of cosmetics because I do truly play Smite for the gameplay. And I'm not trying to say that people that do prioritize skins higher than I do don't enjoy the gameplay. I'm just trying to say that level of prioritization is significantly different. My prioritization for skins is like pretty much zero. So I guess I'm going to end this section by asking an open-ended question. If Hi-Rez needs to resort to scummy business tactics to keep Smite alive, how far is it acceptable for them to go? And I ask this question because there's this nagging feeling, at least in my mind, and I hope that a lot of veteran players also share this nagging feeling, that like, you know, Smite's going to die at some point. And I don't say that in a pessimistic way. I say that in a realistic way. Smite will die at some point, and I don't think it's unfair for someone to assume that that's going to happen sooner rather than later. And so if a way to extend that or even save it is by, you know, being scummy with their business models, are you okay with that? So this next opinion states, Smite 2 should have started years earlier while booming from COVID. Would have had more time, money, resources, and staff to make it great by the time more people could start playing it. This isn't a hot take. I'd even argue this is a fairly common opinion. The reason it's included in this video is because it comes from Kitten of Doom, who is an ex-Hi-Rez developer who now works on Rocket League. Not only that, but another former Hi-Rez employee agreed in the comments. I thought I'd include this because the topic of how Hi-Rez should have handled the public release of Smite 2 has been debated since it was announced. And personally, I think when multiple former developers share this opinion, that holds a significant amount of weight, at least for me. So if you want to combat this by saying I'm just cherry picking two developers, I'll give you that, you know, because maybe there's other developers that disagree. And also I'm sure there's other developers that aren't on social media at all that have their own thoughts and opinions, right? But yeah, I fully agree with this take. I think Smite 2 was released a little bit early, and I also think the development was a bit rushed. Not in the sense where I think they're like currently doing a bad job. I think they're doing relatively okay given the circumstances they're in. But also they should have had the foresight to notice, okay, we are pushing Unreal Engine 3 to its absolute fucking limit. And whether we want it or not, the game will die if we continue on this path. And I also agree that COVID would have been the perfect opportunity to at least start thinking about it. And who knows, maybe they were thinking about it as early as then and just didn't pull the trigger until it was too late. I really hope that's not the case, but we'll just have to wait and see. I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting that 2 former Hi-Rez employees shared this opinion. So from Dream Demon, we need Herc Adventures back. That shit was peak and the racing game was garbage. First off, how fucking dare you criticize Smite Kart? If anything is worth saving in this game, it's Smite Kart 2 or Bun Hats 2. On a serious note, Smite Adventures in general seem to have allowed a minority of players that loved it, and I would include myself in this group of people. I loved the adventures, but I also think it'd be selfish of me to say Hi-Rez should revisit it and dedicate resources to it, because the adventures have been some of the least popular Smite content in terms of longevity. From my understanding, each Smite adventure popped off for a few days, and then very little people went back and played them consistently. And obviously, I don't know exact numbers, so feel free to disagree with this, but I knew that the numbers for Smite adventures, they weren't great. I'm fairly certain they were consistently the bottom most played game modes after a couple days of being released, and they never really went back up. And that seemed to have been consistent for pretty much every adventure, except for maybe an outlier 1 or 2. So I get it, I enjoyed them, but I'll disagree unless there's a hypothetical scenario where Smite 2 pops off and they genuinely can afford to do cool shit like adventures again. But in terms of resource allocation, I'd rather them spend time elsewhere right now. From PND4, I hate when Smite veterans on Twitter or Reddit critique the beta while hyperbolizing its issues, which then gives ammo to those who only want to see Smite 2 fail. I'm not against critiquing the game, but non-constructive criticism will lead nowhere. I really like this comment, particularly because it's very specific. This is kind of just a more thought out version of the phrase toxicity isn't criticism. A lot of content creators, and I'll admit I've been guilty of this, will pick like a couple of issues and brand that as a like top priority issue, even if they didn't really intend to. So whatever the issue that a hypothetical content creator is bringing up, it might be extremely valid, but we got to be careful, right? Because problems do come up when other important pieces of feedback are seemingly brushed aside. Because no, this one specific thing that affected me in my live stream is the #1 priority. Obviously that was sarcasm, but a lot of people tend to forget that Smite, it's a really complex game. And so if this feedback is brought up publicly and, you know, they're making a big fucking deal out of something that in the grand scheme of things is only a tiny piece, of Smite's issues, then yeah, you know, somebody that wants to see Smite fail will be like, wow, people are really still complaining about this. Pfft, Smite's doomed. So I think it's just important to remember that how you phrase feedback is very impactful, because there's a difference between saying, hey, like this, like, why is this in the game? This fucking sucks. Hi-Rez sucks. And just, hey, you know, I found this thing. I'm wondering if there's a roadmap to fixing it. Doodoo PGC says, Doodoo, the IP will be sold by the end of the year. This has been a theory circulating for a while, and I just don't think it'll happen, especially in the time frame given by this commenter. I don't actually know where I stand on this, because on one hand, I do believe Hi-Rez has mismanaged pretty much all of their games from a corporate standpoint, and to an outsider looking in, they could view it as like a golden opportunity, right? Because Smite is unique in the sense where we have a very dedicated player base that's persisted despite all of Hi-Rez's mismanagement. Or people looking to buy might look at it as like a dumpster fire that's been holding on for dear life. So like, I think both of those are valid, although I do think that there is a much better chance that Smite won't be sold at all, let alone by the end of the year. But also there's the chance that Smite could be mismanaged more if somebody else bought it. And granted, that would be really fucking impressive. So now that I've said all of this out loud, I think I am on the side of wanting someone to buy out Hi-Rez, because like, it's already not great. And if it gets worse, that's just kind of funny. Steven says, aspects just feel like a desperate move to stay relevant. They don't make me want to log in. MOBAs are already a huge knowledge check. Why double that by adding something like raw ult that heals? Just focus on creating more interesting gods to expand the roster. So before going into the specific quote, I just wanted to say that when I was reading through my Twitter thread, I didn't realize how controversial aspects were. I thought aspects were more liked than disliked, but now I'm starting to wonder if that's the case. So it's kind of interesting having this like pre-constructive narrative in my head for how people viewed aspects, and then seeing not just one, but like multiple people challenge that. I guess the first thing I have to say is that I don't think aspects as like a concept is keeping this person, you know, Steven, away from Smite 2. I'm willing to bet that it's either a multitude of things and aspects is what he's focusing on, or if there was just like a few aspects that really made him angry, then I could see where they're coming from. So let's assume that this is true and aspects are the sole reason keeping this person from Smite 2. I don't know what to comment on that, because that's entirely valid. If something is preventing you from enjoyment, then you should stop doing the thing. I'd encourage that in anybody. I don't think it matters how dumb the reason is for not playing a game. Ultimately, if you're not enjoying it, regardless of what the reason is, that's valid. So going through the rest of the quote, saying that high-res included aspects to stay relevant, I just don't believe that's true. And this is where some of my bias comes in, because I'm actually friends with the developer that pioneered the concept of aspects. So you don't have to believe me, but I'm here to reassure that, you know, I've had conversations with this person, and it's very easy to tell that there's genuine passion going into aspects that not everyone is going to notice. I do think it's worth discussing how much aspects should change, because I think they're here to stay. I don't think high-res will ever scrap this idea, because there's already been so much time put into it. So I think it'd be more worthwhile to instead frame the conversation as what should aspects change. And the reason for that is for two. One, if they just scrapped aspects entirely and stopped making it, the game would look pretty clunky, because some characters would have aspects and some wouldn't. So then the question is, why do some have an aspect and why don't some have an aspect? What's the reasoning there? It's just inconsistent. It looks tacky, in my opinion. The second is that I do think there's value in addressing the fact that if a game is too complex, that could have a net negative impact on the game. So let's assume a hypothetical where Smite 2 lives long enough to catch up to Smite 1 in terms of god roster. In Smite 1, there are around 130 gods. By the time Smite 2 catches up to Smite 1, that number will go up because there are Smite 2 exclusive gods. Now, let's say that every single god has an aspect. That's 260 kits that need to be learned if you want to, you know, be as knowledgeable as possible going into a Smite match. But then the counter argument to that would be, okay, well, what if aspects only change a small portion of the god's kit? Then it's not nearly as daunting. And that's kind of the angle that I'm more so looking at. I don't want aspects to fully change how a god is. I want aspects to more so be small changes that have a large impact on their playstyle. The way that I'm personally judging an aspect on this is whether I can look at a god's base kit, regardless of whether they have the aspect on or not, and know on a surface level of what's going on. I'll use Fenrir as an example. His leap is still a leap, his 2 is still a buff, his 3 is still a brutalize, and his ult is still the exact same ultimate. That does not change whether the aspect is on or not. The only things that change are slight stat differences, and the 2 is more of an AoE aura rather than a self buff. Because I don't think aspects should basically make an entirely different god. I think that would be doing a bit too much. Small changes, big impacts, either changes the primary role that they're playing or allows them to play the same role just completely differently. A good example of the latter, I think, would be like Merlin. So yeah, I'm generally on the side of I think aspects are good, but it does add a new layer of challenges to the game. So while I do think this person has interesting discussion in certain aspects, pun unintended, of his comment, I'm on the side that I think aspects are a net positive for the game. Sean is saying that Hi-Rez as a company doesn't deserve its community. Smite kept funding projects that the company didn't know how to manage, while the Smite community didn't get anything new to keep playing, or for keeping playing. I think that was a typo. Developers made the impossible for us, but Hi-Rez didn't invest on marketing or anything else. I'm editing this video, and why the fuck did I call him Sean? His name isn't Sean. There's no indication of their name being Sean. Why did I say Sean? I don't know if I would consider this a hot take, but I think it's worth discussing because this is kind of like someone saying the quiet part out loud, right? This is a very harsh comment, but I also think there's a lot of truth to it. It's just one of those things that really sucks to hear because you're like, damn, like things could be so much better if certain decisions were changed, right? But unfortunately, this is the reality we're in. You know, just briefly going over some of the projects they've tried. DKO, Realm Royale, Rogue Company. Like a lot of people are viewing these as failed projects, and I'd agree with that. So it can be frustrating seeing Hi-Rez allocate a lot of resources to projects that ultimately failed when that could have been reinvested into games that weren't failing at the time, right? For the last comment, they didn't invest on marketing. I'm just not sure if that's true. I think that's more true in the current day, like as of this video being uploaded, but I think to say that Hi-Rez hasn't invested on marketing, period, is just a little inaccurate because I'm pretty sure there was a pretty big marketing push when the game dropped in alpha and beta. But since then, yeah, I think it's gone down a lot, so I'll agree there. In a similar boat, J2Faye is commenting, actually, it's a good thing they tried to make other games. And this is kind of the other side of that argument. I'm actually re-recording this part because while editing, I realized there's two ways to look at this comment. You can look at it as making other games is good for Smite, or making other games is good for the company. Getting the easy one out of the way, yes, taking on other new projects will expand the company, it'll create more jobs within the company, and give them an additional revenue stream. But that's also only true for an extended period of time if the game is successful, which, you know, we've already talked about multiple high-risk titles have not been successful. Now, it gets a bit tricky when you try to argue whether it's good for Smite or not. I initially said that having multiple games under a company's belt means they'll all mutually benefit each other, again, assuming they're successful. But then some of my friends argued that it's different for specifically live service games, which pretty much all of Hi-Rez's titles have been. And I did some research on this, and I couldn't find anything conclusive on whether multiple successful live service games under the same company will mutually benefit each other. The two things I did find were just examples of companies with multiple successful live service games, but obviously just because a company made it work doesn't necessarily mean that they're mutually benefiting each other. And then I found a lot of stuff talking about how like multiple single player offline games are all gonna benefit each other if the company is the same. And like, yeah, no shit, because when the game drops, there's significantly less maintenance than an online multiplayer game. So that being said, Hi-Rez hasn't really made another game that reached the success that Smite did. And with so many failed projects under their belt, it's understandable why some people would get upset. But it's also a lot easier to say this when you're taking hindsight into account, because anyone with the knowledge of today would advise to not to make other Hi-Rez games, right? Because we've seen that they've failed. I'm wondering what people's opinion of Hi-Rez making other games would be if there were more than a few games that could sustain themselves. I'm gonna end this video by talking about a comment from Intersect because it allows me to talk about what I want the general theme of this video to be, and I kind of have a crush on it. It's just human nature in general, but Smite players are so adverse to change, even if it would be better for the game. Reworks to problematic characters aren't done due to backlash, investing so heavily in making Smite 2 more like Smite 1 instead of actually new stuff, etc. Before I say anything, I want to emphasize that I do agree with him, and I don't think he's saying this in like an attacking way. I think he's saying it in more of like a, man, I'm bummed out kind of way. I emphasize this because I truly believe that Smite would be a much better game if there was just a little more understanding in the community. I wish conversations were phrased as, here's why I feel the way I do about a certain thing, instead of, well, I'm correct and here's why I'm correct and here's why you're wrong. So in the context of change, again, I agree with him. There are so many people commenting things like, oh, who asked for this? And just being toxic in general when Hi-Rez does literally anything to try and differentiate itself from Smite 1. And don't get me wrong, it's important to have a similar foundation that Smite 1 did so that, you know, the Smite identity is still there. But that doesn't mean Hi-Rez can't or should not experiment with their new toys. But on the other hand, people just simply do not trust Hi-Rez with experimentation. And Hi-Rez has given them reasons to believe that. That is true and that is valid. But also someone saying that they want experimentation because it can lead to higher highs is also true and valid. And I think that's where the disconnect is. So if anything at all is taken away from this video, I really hope it's to just try and be a bit more understanding. Thank you guys for watching, and yeah, this was an extremely fun video to make, and I'm very open to a part 2. And if you watched my last video, I am not open to a part 2 about that. That shit took me like 10-15 hours to make. Fuck that. But this video, no, there's just so much more I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to keep the video under 30 minutes as well. Somebody brought up DKO that I wanted to talk about. Somebody brought up the Oni Warriors decimation during SPL that I wanted to talk about. Worlds with Fans was talked about. Somebody even said remove base prots entirely. That was talked about. It was just so fun to see all these different opinions, but I didn't want this video being a feature-length film. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Reminder to be civil in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.